how to embrace the magic in the mess and find the joy in chaos is such a beautiful way to encapsulate how we can turn in some of those suckiest moments into magical moments that can really be fuel for other people. And most importantly, fuel for our next becoming, that next evolution of ourself. As we do the work, as we do that introspection, life will throw different kinds of curveballs. And then when you've kind of gone through all of those hurdles, you're kind of ready for that next evolution again.
Let's talk about the book. I mean, you have so many great stories. I wanted to talk about your next marriage and all that, which is the one you're in right now, and your beautiful kids and the birth stories. But
Oh,
you
yeah.
ended up writing this book, That Sucked, Now What? And obviously, anyone who's heard this interview up to this point can understand how you coined that phrase, right, based on your own life experiences. So for the listener, how do you define a moment of suck? Let's say your parents haven't died and all that, but how do you know you're in a moment of suck?
Oh, yeah. Well, something that you had thought that was going to go your way didn't. Maybe it was a breakup.
Mhm.
Maybe it was a slight from your friend, or a ghost from somebody that you thought that you were going to go on a date with, and they ghosted you. Or maybe, somebody
Maybe
that
the babysitter ghosted you.
maybe the babysitter ghosted, because that's definitely happened to me many times. Maybe the fact that, you needed somebody to cover for you, and they didn't show up, or they betrayed you. They were talking behind your back and you found out, or you got a notice in the mail that you had to pay an extra few $1,000s in your tax bill, and you don't actually have the money because you had to use it to cover your parents' roof, or whatever the case is. It's something that completely caught you off guard, that was unexpected. A breakup, a loss, a betrayal from a friend, a slight from a friend. Um, Maybe even something that you worked so hard on, like a promotion or a gig, and you were, the next contender and they picked somebody else. These are all moments of suck.
And we've all experienced these, and typically the response is, let me react to it, let me feel victimized by it, let me do the woe is me thing. So what are you offering as alternatives to stay empowered when you're experiencing a moment of suck?
Oh, embrace it. Embrace the suck.
Mhm.
And here's why.
How do you do that? Like, realistically, how do you embrace the suck?
Yeah. Well, first, I think it's so easy as humans. Like, what do we want to do? What's the thing that we want to do? We want to bury. We want to distract. We want to escape the suck. We want to avoid that discomfort of the feeling. And so we pick up our phone, we swipe left, we swipe right, we go on IG, we check our email, we turn on the TV, we Netflix and chill. We go to the cupboard, we get the ice cream out, the chocolate, the wine, the mushrooms, all of the things. And escapism is such a real thing, and we're good at it. We're really good at escaping. And what I'm asking you to do is to lean into the suck, lean into that discomfort. And how do you do that? Well, one of the first ways to do that is actually honor the moment. And the only way to do that is to, when something happens, it's our immediate reaction to change, shift, bury, and numb. But I want you to say, okay, well, that sucked. Now what? That sucked. And even just saying that mantra, I'm giving you an anchor to actually shift and acknowledge, because I'm not saying this sucks. I'm saying that sucked, because we're giving reverence to the thing that happened that we can't control, that it actually happened. And yeah, it was big. We're honoring it. We're accepting our reality, and our reality you can't change. We can only accept. But in that moment, you're actually, that sucked is your mantra. You're saying, shit, that's big. I can't deny it. I can't deny my humanity, and I have feelings around it. So what do we do next? Well, number two, we identify our emotion. Okay, well, how do we do that? Well, see what is coming up, what is rising to the top. Are your hands getting, your fists getting clenched, or maybe you start to clench your jaws, or you have like tension headaches that you notice, or maybe your stomach is in knots. But these are ways where we tend to bury, and we're like, no, I'm good. I'm actually really good right now, but you're clenching your fists. You're just lying to nobody, but yourself. To feel that, to allow it, to allow it. And I think some of us, or most of us, we're afraid of being stuck in the suck. We're afraid that if we do allow ourselves to feel that anxiety, to feel that overwhelm, to feel that jealousy, the rage, the discomfort, that we're going to get stuck in it, we're going to get swept away in it. So what's the worst case scenario that can happen if you're stuck in it? Because I've got tons of tools to kind of help you get out, to fly forward. And, one of the things for people who aren't comfortable in doing this kind of work is you can set a timer. You can actually say, all right, I'm going to set a timer for 30 seconds, and I'm going to whine, and I'm going to bitch, and I'm going to, say like, I can't believe I didn't get this thing. I didn't get this opportunity. Like, set your whining timer, have your pity party of 1 for that minute to feel and allow and process and state out loud. Many times we have like it's like the pressure cooker, and that pressure is like building up, and that's where we're like tense. But if we're allowing ourselves to express and really opening our vocal cords, that vagus nerve runs from our head to our toes. And if we're able to, say out loud, even opening up our vocal cords in a scream, in a moan, and maybe singing, chanting even, to allow ourselves to center our nervous system. And that's kind of what we want to do. But in order to center it, we've got to kind of release it. And some of you might like the 5-step process that I actually talk about. I'm talking about it in, 3 steps right now. Some of you might say, well, actually, no, walking outside works for me, or grounding in my closet where my kids can't find me for 2 minutes before I, start screaming at them. Well, I can tune in. That's perfect too. But it's your way of emotionally regulating that feels good. But I would definitely suggest, notice where that feeling is coming. First, take a deep breath, put your hand over your heart. Like, we can actually do this. We can be that embrace from a caretaker, coming back from school at 5 or 6, when we wanted the embrace of our loved one. Well, as an adult, you could actually do that. When you're putting your hand to your heart, that's signaling your rest and digest system to say, okay, I got this. There's that mind-body connection where we're not ruminating in our thoughts. We're bringing it back to our body. So yeah.
What about the now what part? Like, what do you do next? Let's say you sat in it, you've acknowledged it. Now what?
Yeah. So the now what can look so different. The now what can be the reality that you create, right? The now what can be completely different, completely imperfect than that sucked. And it's one of the reasons why, even in my cover, it's depicted so differently. It's to give you the permission to suck. Especially if you're doing something completely new, completely scary, completely different than you normally would. The now what can be something completely bold, and just giving yourself permission to go in a different direction than you normally would. And in the book, part 3 of the book is all dedicated to building your flying forward past the sucky moments, so that you're not stuck in the suck, that we can climb out of the suck and actually fly forward. And some of the strategies that I talk about when you are literally rising out from the suck is, it's going to be wobbly. You're going to feel like, oh my gosh, am I doing things right? Am I, I'm feeling really open right now because I want to, open my heart to love again, but maybe I'm also reserved, because the duality of both of those emotions, the conflicting emotions, they coexist, and that's normal. But to actually lean into it with curiosity and say, okay, I am going to do this. and have compassion for yourself in that stage, because you're creating baby steps. You're not going to get it right. It's going to be messy, and embracing the magic along the way is one of the biggest things that I can recommend.
You are a living example of someone who's literally turned her mess into very powerful message. And I'm curious what your thinking is around other people going through certain things. Like, do you think people go through things randomly? Do you think that the things that we go through that suck we're supposed to use them in some way as our message? Like, should we be looking in that direction when we come out of that sucky phase and start thinking, okay, well, I was depressed for whatever, however many years, and should I write about my depression? Like, would that be a good first step to kind of process and move forward, or what's your thinking about that?
Absolutely. So, like in Flying Forward, which is part 3 of the book, we talk about the thriving stage, and thriving stage could really look like, how are you alchemizing? How are you kind of integrating all of the lessons in your life? And we all have these adventures. Some of us take those adventures and we, those messy moments, and it becomes our dharma. It becomes our path to either teach others. And we want to do that because it's giving us life and it's giving us juice. Some of us maybe don't want to do that. Maybe we are inspired by it, but maybe we want to give back in a different way. So it could look like, not, quitting your day job, but it could look like maybe finding organizations that you can actually support, that have helped you in that way. And, you could do it that way. Some people are thinking like they can mentor the next generation so that they don't have to go through the same types of things that they did, or maybe they're just doing it within their family, so that their lineage can stop the generational trauma from passing through, because now they know better. They've done the work. And or maybe they're, getting checked up, even faster and easier, because they know that they carry this, medical trait or disease that they want to make sure that they're not passing it down to their family. So it could look very different, right? But even in my subtitle, How to Embrace the Magic in the Mess and Find the Joy in Chaos, that's my invitation to everyone listening, is that, yeah, maybe some of these circumstances, if we haven't learned, what the universe, what source, what that next evolution, that next path for ourselves, what we're really having to do in our lives. And if we haven't cultivated that yet, those same lessons may show up in different ways, different circumstances, different setbacks, different challenges, until we start to gain the lessons for, ourselves. And so I think it is such a beautiful way to encapsulate how we can turn in some of those, suckiest moments into magical moments that can really be fuel for other people. And most importantly, fuel for, our next becoming, that next evolution of ourself, the next level in Mario Kart. If we were thinking that this life is that game, right? It's like that first level is going to be super easy. But as we do the work, as we do that introspection, perhaps, life will throw different kinds of curveballs. And that's that level 2. And then when you've kind of gone through all of those hurdles, you're kind of ready for that next evolution again. And it's going to look different. And, in this book, you have a lot of the tools that will not only help you thrive, but it'll also help you when you're falling and going through that stage of falling and embracing that suck moment, to actually alchemize even faster, into, that next part of you.
Yeah, and something else that I think is really powerful about your book is that you give lots and lots of case studies of people who you've worked with and who've gone through a sucky moment. And so you get to see almost from every single angle, what different examples of that would be. And just to kind of entice the listener to pick up the book more, what would you say is one of them, if you did a meta-analysis of all your case studies, because you've worked with, thousands of people at this point, what would you say is the most unexpected outcome of embracing the suck that you've seen people have?
Oh, yeah, that they're not so hard on themselves anymore. That I think that, if especially when we're coming from backgrounds where we are not allowed to express our voice, or we're not allowed to share what's really on our mind, or we've been oppressed in some way, or we're the people pleasers, and we don't want
Mm,
to get things wrong. Well, now they're kind of on the other side, so, unapologetic, and there's this liberation, there's this freedom that comes from embracing the suck. Because then
mhm,
it's this lightness, it's this levity and that's why the book is not called Fly Forward. It's called That Sucked, Now What? It's to literally give grace in the human experience. And I think that has been the through line for everybody who has been able to embrace the suck. I mean, from CEOs to everyday moms to everyday humans that are, I think so often we put so much pressure on ourselves. And this is that book that allows you to have fun in the process.
mm. Do you still you find yourself having a little bit of PTSD around, like your kids? You have two kids now, and your family, and the things that you care about.
Oh gosh. It's a great question. I feel like it's changed now. I definitely, and I think I talk about this in the book as well. The postpartum depression with both of my kids
Mm,
were definitely eye-opening. And they were eye-opening because I know that a lot of moms go into the worry factor. And I went into the worrying phase. I mean, I feel like super normal. As a mom, you want to make sure that they're alive and breathing. And so, but I think that for me, it was mostly like postpartum rage that came up a lot.
mm,
And
mm, mm,
where I needed to make peace with the anger that I couldn't actually express when I was a teenager, when my dad got his diagnosis. I couldn't express that rage. I had to like suppress it, and it just couldn't go anywhere when I was, couldn't take care of my kids because I'm like healing, and my mother-in-law is here, and matriarchs in my family are around to support me. And I just wanted to like, you know, um, deny everyone's help because for the first time, those feelings were coming back. And I'm like, ooh, that feeling felt familiar. And I don't like that, but I can't do anything about it. And
mm.
so I think it definitely expanded my realm of emotional capacity, which was very different than going through PTSD of loss, because it was, wow, I'm taking care of this young person now, and I need to really focus in on my own regulation of my emotions and explore what that actually means. And hence, that's why this book was born. So, yeah.
You
Yeah.
were called Beta as a child. Is that? I saw you made a reference to Beta in
Yeah,
your
so
book.
it's actually called beta. Beta,
Beta,
beta. There you go. There you go. In
Beta,
Hindi.
Beta.
Yeah, in Hindi means like little one.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Beta. Beautiful. Okay, so your dad is Hindi, your mom is Filipino. You grew up in Chicago.
I did.
Um, when you were a beta, what were
Very
some of
good.
your earlier memories of like activities or toys, or
Oh
what were
God.
you getting into? What did you really enjoy?
Yeah, no, so growing up Filipino-Indian, you're kind of like forced to do a lot of the traditional things. So a lot of
Uh,
dance. Dance was a big part of our life for sure. And so it was Indian classical dancing, and it was also Filipino classical dancing. If you've ever been to, I don't know, in the Philippines, they do the stick dance where you're dancing in between two sticks and it goes fast. And yeah, so I think you know, I never became a break dancer when I was in high school, but a lot of our friends did because they were able to like dance between the sticks, and that's what you did. Hawaiian dancing was another big one that Filipinos toss their kids in. So yeah, I was like a little, I wouldn't say my mom was a dance mom, but we were definitely shuttled in performances, and piano was a big part of that. Um, yeah, it was busy growing up, definitely.
When did Mario Kart come into the picture?
Oh, Mario Kart was a little older. Yeah. First it started with first it was Mario Brothers, you know, like Mario
Uh-huh.
and Luigi. Yes, Nintendo. Shout out to back in the day, and then Sonic.
Shout out to back in the day. Mhm.
and then Sonic. I think I was a little too young for Atari, but yeah, it was definitely for me Nintendo, and then Nintendo 64. So then Mario Kart came a little bit later. I think when my youngest brother came into the mix. But Mario Kart
Mm.
was
So you,
definitely one of those games that I loved.
so you had two younger brothers, and what was the your parents are immigrants, right? So what was the immigrant philosophy as young kids growing up in your household? And I know again you mentioned in your book that there wasn't a lot of vulnerability expressed. You didn't show emotion. So what were they? What was some of the messaging you still remember from
Oh
both your
God.
parents being around?
Yeah, I think I only got validated around that time from my dad when I came back winning awards, for sure.
Mm.
And it was something that he could brag about to his friends, right? Neeta won, X whatever prize, or first place in this. Vinay won this, first place in this. DJ won this, or their dance troupe won this. It was a very proud, and legacy building and success was a big thing. All of the
Achievements.
achievements were huge. Yeah, it was so huge. Luckily, I didn't really, participate in the spelling bee, but that's very stereotypical for Filipino-Indian family, especially Indian part. But yeah, the sentiments growing up was study hard. And no matter what, like, there's a bully. I remember being in the fifth grade and I came home crying. It was like the fifth or the sixth grade. And I came home crying because I was, there was, and I grew up in the city of Chicago. Like it was a magnet school, but it was like full on city. And I just remember there were times where, like you feel unsafe. And yeah, like I was getting threatened to get beat up. And, if somebody's boyfriend was curious about you or something like that. We were just so racially ambiguous because my parents were immigrants. So um, most of the time, like nobody kind of could tell or put us in the box of, are you Asian or Spanish or whatever, half and half. So it was, you got a lot of that kind of attention, which also was very prime for bullying, at least in my experience. And yeah, I remember coming home crying to my parents, and my dad just like, "So what? Study." That was it. It's like, okay, study hard. Maybe they won't bully you if you're like the top of the class. And so he didn't understand that at all. And my mom, she definitely worked a lot, so I didn't really get to see her as much. My dad was definitely one that was home with us because where his office was very close to our house, and so he usually did the
Mhm.
afternoon evening routine with us, and so he was kind of like that emotional support, but not really, it was very tough love.
What was your impression of their union, your mom and your dad, when you were a kid? Did it seem like
Yeah,
they were in love?
they were in love. I mean, it was definitely a love marriage for sure.
Mhm.
My dad, and coming from a very different background than my mom, Filipinos, they're usually, matriarchs. They're usually the ones that are very, they're very strong,
Mhm.
and sometimes lean into the masculine more because they're, holding up a household, they're doing a lot, and that's just in the that's in the diaspora, that's in the culture. and for Indians, it's very much a patriarchal society. And so there's definitely, there was some, some disagreements there for sure. For sure. I know that they had a loving relationship, but the cultural nuances, the differences, the fact that they both were, my mom was very strong in her religion. She was Catholic. So, and my dad was very spiritual. Like he grew up in India during a time where, like the partition happened 5 years after he was born. And so, um, they really loved spirituality more than anything else. I think that he grew up going to the Mandir, the Hindu temple, and the Gurdwara, the Sikh temple, because he was born in Punjab. And yeah, so he just had a very different way of tuning back into himself. But that was one of the initial places where I would learn, about spirituality, was literally through him.
Was there like a little altar set up in your living room?
Oh yeah, we had an altar set up actually. It's interesting because if you've ever watched the movie Coco, and Coco's very, Catholic, but it's a Pixar movie about how they celebrate the Day of the Dead and Dia de los Muertos, and how they have the altar set up for all of the family members that have passed away. Well, we had two altars, one for like my Filipino side, and my mom had like, my great grandfather and, all of the ancestors there. So it very much is so similar to that movie. And then you would every year around the Day of the Dead or All Saints Day, the Catholic holiday, you would kind of like put offerings and food, but then you would go into the master bedroom of my parents, and there was like a huge altar, like a puja altar, where my dad would have his mala beads, and then he'd have, his agarbatti, the incense sticks, and, all of the deities like Ganesha and Krishna, and just, he was a big Hare Krishna guy, just because in Chicago, that was like the only temple back in the 80s. And that's where they got married. It was like 5 minutes from our house, but that's kind of where, we grew up chanting Hare Krishna. And yeah, and that was, yeah, that was a big part. But, he was a very big advocate of, you can go to all of these different houses of worship, but make sure you just have your own. And, I think even as I've gotten older, and especially through some of my dark times, I definitely would carry like a tiny little altar with me, whether it was a deity, whether it was a representation and, a rock. Now I've got all kinds of different tools, but even like the earlier days, I definitely had something to ground me for sure.
When you were a kid, do you remember feeling like that was a special thing that your family experienced that other families didn't? Or were you like embarrassed if anybody found out that there were all these altars in your house that your dad used to chant to or whatever?
Oh my
What was your
gosh.
relationship with that, with your
Yeah,
friends?
no, again, I grew up in the city of Chicago. Like all of my friends were either Black or Spanish. I was like the oddball mixed Indian kid, and it wasn't cool to be Indian back then, and so,
Hmm.
um, and I think you kind of just want to belong at that time for sure. That's all you want to do is to fit in. And I think, yeah, there was a lot of denying of what I was. There was a lot of denying of the practices because we didn't have that much of a, Filipino or Indian community until we got into kind of like dancing and like the dance community, which was very cultural. But, it's almost like you had two identities from just even within friend circles where, okay, you're not Filipino enough, like you don't sing, you don't do karaoke, because I didn't. And that's like a Filipino joke because every single Filipino person is like a entertainer, not our family. And so yeah, so there was that, but then there was also, the Indian side where you weren't Indian enough. And so it felt really interesting growing up in that mix. And I feel like no one's, really asked me that. So thank you. That's a very yeah, that's a great question. And And that definitely played a role as to in my childhood what I was wanting to share, because we would do all of these really interesting, cool um celebrations. Diwali was definitely not, like they're like, wait, why are you celebrating Christmas in October? What's that? So and
Mhm.
now of course it's like celebrated in all the ways. Yeah, it wasn't like that back then.
Mm. So when you were 10 years old, your mom was diagnosed with cancer. How did she find out she had cancer, or what were the symptoms
Oh
that led her to go
gosh.
get the diagnosis?
I don't remember like the full. So here's what I do remember from that time in my life, because, things during that time, it was so chaotic. And I just remember, my mom, finding a lump in her breast. And like, I think she
Hmm.
was in the shower, and they just went, and it was like a routine, well, not a routine checkup, because at this point, she had found something. And then they kind of confirmed that it was breast cancer. And I remember vividly that, and I mean, this is etched in my memory forever, but I remember being 10, and I remember she was going in for her like biopsy, or her like the surgery, the mastectomy. And I remember being with my great grandmother, my Lola, and I had the chicken pox, so I couldn't go with them. And I remember having the chicken pox in my room, and I'm like, everyone left, like no one's at the house, because my mom was going through this big surgery. And I guess my brothers didn't have chicken pox at the time, but I did. And no one told me anything about having the chicken pox. I'm like, why am I itching everywhere? And my poor great grandmother, like, she only spoke a little bit of English. She only spoke Tagalog. So, and I'm like crying to her and telling her, like, well, I don't even know what to do. I'm itching everywhere. And all she does is she gives me a bottle of calamine lotion, that pink stuff. And she's like, rub this on. And because I think she was probably afraid of getting it. I don't know, but I just remember being so alone in my room, and even like crying, thinking like, how could they abandon me? And I literally like felt that that's kind of where that, abandonment wound started to come through. It etched, around that time for sure. It was such a pivotal moment. And then when everybody came back, I was like, where did everybody go? And then that's when they said, yeah, your mom has breast cancer, and they've removed the tumor. I didn't really understand what that meant. But that would be the journey, and it would be the journey of me stepping into a role of then caretaking.
Mm. Well, also a couple of years later, with your mom having survived initially, you're out at the mall with your dad and you have a request. And this leads to you having your first entrepreneurial adventure. So can you just share a little bit about that
Oh
experience?
yeah. Oh yeah. It was limited to 12 years old. And what that would have put me in like sixth grade or something like that.
Hmm.
And so I remember at this point my mom was in remission, between when I was 12 and 14. And I remember going to the mall, because that's what you did. It was Water Tower Mall. Limited to was the store, and I passed through. Yeah. I feel like we grew up at the same time. And I passed through that mall, and I was like glittery blue jeans, and it was the jeans that had, like the rip on them, but it was like glitter all the way through. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to have these jeans. And I'm like, Pa, can we actually, like, can we do this? Like, can I get these? I promise I won't ask for anything again. And he's like, no, no, you can't. And it was like a flat out no. And I was so bummed, because I'm like, it would make me the coolest girl in the sixth grade. Can I just have it? And he's like, when you grow up and you make your own money, you can buy your own clothes. But right now you have so many clothes. And I just remember I felt so defeated, and I felt like, oh gosh, like like he's not listening to me. Like, this is so important. And so I remember going home and going in my room, and I was determined because I wanted those blue jeans and I wanted those blue jeans so bad. And so I took my, my journal, shout out to like the journals that had like the little locket and key back in the day. And well, I don't know if you had kept a journal, but I sure did. And so, I started writing all the ways and I'm like, okay, make my own money. Pa says that I have to make my own money. So I said, all right, well, how can I do this? Well, I kind of, wrote out how much it would cost. And I don't know, I think the jeans back then were like $25 or something like that. But I remember it was like a lot of money for me. And so I looked at my like piggy bank and like, you only have like a few quarters in there. I mean, it's not enough. And so I started to write down, okay, like I can bake goods and I can sell it because we lived in a high rise. We lived in a building. I can sell it to the women, the elderly people in my building, and they'll probably buy stuff. And then I kind of wrote out like, okay, watch my neighbor's cat, because there was somebody on our floor that had a cat. And so I just started writing all these things. And then I looked at my closet and I see, of course, I wasn't the tidiest person back then. And I see clothes on the floor, and he said, and I kind of just remember like, okay, Pa said I have too many clothes. And so I look and I'm like, ooh, okay, sell my clothes. And so it was like the light bulb moment for me. Then I'm like, it was almost like, I'll show you, Pa, So I removed, some of the clothes that I was like, okay, this person I think would really like this. This person I think would like this. And so I literally put the clothes in my backpack. The next day I got to school and I passed notes, and I think it was like math class, but I said, can you meet me in the bathroom during lunchtime? I'm going to actually I'm having a garage sale, and maybe, maybe you might want to get somebody these. I'm getting rid of these clothes. And so then a few of my friends, we were all, into fashion, because it was just, we were very like girly girls. And so I start giving my friends, I'm like, try this on. And so lo and behold, I sold 2 pieces of my clothing that day, and it was $5 each. So I came home with $10. And I was really, really proud of those $10. And I showed my dad and I said, Pa, well, you told me that when I get my own money, I can buy my own clothes. And so I showed him the $10 that I got. And he's like, Beta, how did you get that? And he's like, who gave you that? And I said, well, my friends. And he's like, what do you mean? And I said, well, you told me I had too many clothes, so I sold them. And the look on his face, I know he was like proud, but he was also like, why would they buy your clothes? So like your used clothes. So it was like, personal shopping invented before personal shopping became a thing. For those listening, did I actually become, like part of that being my journey? No, it was just it was actually one of the few things that I tried when I really wanted what I wanted. And I ended up getting those blue jeans, and boy, did it feel good to put those blue jeans on. Yeah.
Well, it changes your orientation too, I think, as a person, as a young person, because now you've monetized everything in your room. You're like, wait a minute, what else? What else can I sell?
What else can I sell?
How much is this worth? Was your mom back to her normal routine, or did her initial cancer scare shift her whole life, and now she was, I don't know, spending more time at home, or what was going on there?
Oh, these are such great questions, love. She actually, it didn't stop her. I mean, it really, it didn't stop her. It was one of those things where, when she was in remission, and I think back then, there wasn't as much support for, breast cancer as there is now. And, I think that, yeah, like, no, she wasn't part of a support group. She was still working quite a bit. And I think that we were going through some financial troubles as a family too, because when she got sick, I just remember there was a time where things were chaotic. And I think, my mom had to get another job to support the family, because insurance stuff went out. And it's, it's one of the reasons why I'm such a big advocate, right, for emotional and mental health, because yeah, she just kind of went back to her ways of doing things. And I think that definitely caused a big ruckus between my dad and her, because I think my dad really wanted her to just not, you know, be the same way that she was before. And so it caught up with her because, yeah, that cancer came back.
Mhm. So around 15, 16, before you start to experience this string of losses, what was your idea of success? Like, what did you want to be when you quotes grew up?
Oof. I think at 15, I didn't even know what I wanted to be. I knew I loved dancing. Um, and I loved gathering people. I was definitely a gatherer from a very young age, for sure. And I think maybe that's um, that was part of my dharma in many ways. But at 15, I
Had
was
you been indoctrinated in your dad's idea, like you have to achieve and then just keep achieving for the rest of your life? Or did you kind of, were you a little skeptical and think, well, I don't know, maybe I'll try
um
some other things.
so,
I'll get through this while I'm at home, but then,
it was still that part was definitely ingrained. Like, okay, I'm not going to come
mhm.
home with less than an A. I'm going to, strive for success. I'm going to do all the after school activities. I remember picking up a job when I was 15 years old. I don't talk about this in the book, but my first job was working for a dentist named
Mm.
Dr. Horrible. You'd like this. I'm not
Dr.
making this
Horrible,
up.
that's his name.
Yeah, that was it's Horbal, and that's how he pronounced it. I was like, yo, you could just pronounce it Horrible, like,
Who
make
would
it
ever
sound.
go see Dr. Horrible for the dentist?
I'm telling
It's
you,
bad
I
enough
know.
going to the dentist.
I'm telling you, he called himself Dr. Horrible, and it was me at 15. That was my one of my first jobs. And I would work for him on Saturdays. I know, it's really funny. It's just so comedic because yeah, and he was this Polish guy, and he really took me under his wing. He had no I don't know how and why he decided to have a 15-year-old. I think I was 15, work at his office, but I was the one answering his phones and scheduling people for their
Mhm.
appointments. But I remember that was literally one of the things that would for sure change my life, because when there was so much of this chaos going on at home, with my mom sick, with their financial troubles, I knew that I'm like, okay, I can do something. And that meant, oh, I can actually entertain these people that don't want to get a root canal on a Saturday morning. And most of the people coming in, they were elderly. So they it was like a lot of grandma, grandpa energy. And they loved me because I was so young. Probably like, what the heck is this young teenage girl doing in this office? And I just remember I felt so cool not having to work, at like Kmart back in the day, because that's the other thing that people would do for my age. And so, yeah, I just felt really like professional and that I was actually doing something, knowing that some of the people were coming in and they definitely did not want to see Dr. Horrible. And so that would cultivate my sense of empathy and compassion, but also knowing that I could leave whatever was going on in my internal world, and I could focus on helping somebody else out.
That's a theme that shows up a little bit over your earlier life. So give us a little montage of what happens next from 16 to 19.
Yeah, so that would be the toughest years of my life. And yeah, so my mom, when she came out of the remission and was diagnosed again, when the cancer came back, it actually spread everywhere, spread to her lungs, spread to her brain. And I would say the last year of her life was it was pretty bad. She was in a ventilator. And so, yeah, and she was in the ICU. I mean, things got pretty dark. and she lost that battle when I was 16. And then a year later, um, my brother DJ, he would be coming home. He went to a rival school from me in Chicago, and he would be coming home from the homecoming game, and we were gonna meet that day. It was literally almost a year that my mom passed on my youngest brother's birthday, and his inhaler, he had an asthma attack, and his inhaler wasn't working that day. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, and so they could not revive him in the ambulance. They had to rush him to the hospital, and he literally had his lungs collapsed over his heart and gave out, and he died immediately. So that was a huge shock, a huge trauma, to just our entire family. I mean, it sent my dad into full, the heaviness and the depths and the horrific despair of grief and sorrow and loss. And I think people in our community just didn't even know how to support. Um,
Mhm.
and of course, you're just at a loss for words. You're kind of like, wait, when you go through sudden death versus somebody that is like diagnosed for something. I mean, they're both really painful, but the latter is even more shocking because you were just not ever anticipating that, especially because he was healthy. He was he was my
Mhm.
best friend. So that was DJ. And then 2 years after that, my dad and I, when we were starting to come out of this like bubble of grief. And when you're in that tunnel of grief, you're kind of like, oh shit, is this ever going to end? And you have this constant PTSD if you like, the phone rings and you're picking it up and you're like, oh God, is this going to be like a terrible phone call? So my nervous system was definitely in survival mode during that time. But I remember, and 2 years later, after that, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4, lung cancer. And at this
It's
point,
interesting how you guys found that out by dyeing his hair for the
yeah,
wedding.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was so wild because it was like the universe, God, source, somebody was like, hey, you probably want to enjoy the last year of life with your dad. It was just so bizarre. We were getting out of this. We were going to, a family wedding because, that's what you do in Indian families. And this was the first wedding that we would actually show up with with my dad. And my brother Vinay and I, we said, okay, let's dye your hair black because he had like the silver fox hair. And we did. We got this box dye and we were so excited that we could do this like, project together. And immediately as the dye touched his hair, he started getting this like, anaphylactic shock, like full on. His face started to swell up and there we went again. Like my nervous system was like, oh my God. I
Mm.
had to call 911. The ambulance came. I mean, it was just like a shit show. Um, and so they rushed him to that same hospital, the same one that my mom was in, and with the same
Mm.
doctors. And they said, we're going to run a bunch of these tests just to make sure he's okay. We're going to do these x-rays. It's just like we're going to do a full body scan. And, we're like, wait, over a dye? So, and I didn't know. I was like 17 or 18 at this point. I think I was 18. And so I said, okay, we're gonna say yes to all these tests. But it came back with his chest x-ray came back with a inoperable tumor on his lung. And he was in the best health and shape of his life. I mean, he smoked for 30 years, but I think, after my mom got sick initially, he had stopped and he was just on the road to just maximizing his health. He was jogging 6 miles a day. He was at AOL chat rooms, chatting it up with women across the states. Like he was doing his thing, and he was finally starting to see light again in his life. And so he just didn't believe the diagnosis. And And I remember that's
He had
when
no symptoms. He felt completely fine.
he felt fine, totally okay. And he was like literally on a mission, you know, in his own way to really battle these doctors,
Mm,
and wanting to, do these kinds of different therapies. Now, again, didn't know about full nutrition, didn't know about, some of these other methods, Gerson technique, Gerson method, etc. Back then, just didn't know. But
mhm,
in his own way, I think he was doing the best that he could. And yeah, so through chemo, radiation, we did all the traditional stuff. And yeah, as they said, 9 months later, and 9 months later he went. And so,
mm.
yeah, so at 19, I'm now the caretaker of my youngest brother at 14. And so, yeah, it was such a tumultuous time for sure.
Were you left with a bunch of debt from your parents, all their hospital bills? Did you have their house? Was there a mortgage payment? Like what happened to all the aftermath and all of
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, like I don't even share this. I don't think I've ever shared this on any podcast. So thank you for diving so deeply into this. I so appreciate it. Um, yeah, there was a lot of debt. There totally was. And people, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I initially went into medicine. People don't
I can make a lot
realize.
of money fast.
Well, I mean, and to also just, I recognize on the other side that there's also a lot of people who like what you don't even know what happens, how they
Mm,
can't afford like care, and what do you do? I mean, some of the things that I did when I first initially graduated dental school was work for public aid, and just, the access to care. I mean, that's a whole different story, but yeah,
yeah.
did my parents run out of medical support? For sure. I mean, luckily, my grandmother she was a social worker. My Lola was a social worker for the state, my mom's mom. And she was a caseworker. So she knew the trouble that we were in financially, and she got us on, public aid, which is like the food stamps, and which is the insurance, and which is the stipend, because otherwise my dad's bills and my mom's bills were definitely enough to put us out of a house for sure. And we were so
I mean, if
thankful.
someone passes though, do you still have to pay those bills? Like how does that
Um,
work?
so yes, and they can push it onto you. And that was definitely in our case. Yeah, I definitely had to grow up so fast in terms of, estate lawyers and things like that. We were able to keep our house, again, but like there were a lot of things that just, uh weren't thought through, as they did the best that they could in terms of thinking through all of the scenarios. There was some
Mhm.
life insurance stuff that my dad was able to have, and my mom um was able to have for us. But again, my upbringing growing up is like save, 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 and making sure that you have enough for education, et cetera, et cetera. And so, even going into college, I took out all loans, or they were scholarships, or I applied for, extended different scholarships and things. Um, and yeah, it was definitely financially burdensome, but I was always
Mhm.
lucky in getting really amazing jobs to support. Like, at one point I had three jobs. I was a tutor at a very, distinct, uh, privileged private school that paid really well for a college student. And then I also was, working at that dental office on the weekends. And then I was also, doing some retail work as well, just to put food on the table. And of course my family stepped in, my aunts, my uncles, family friends, I call them my bonus parents, Bua and Uncle Glenn. And so I don't think I would be where I am without what I like to call my soul support posse, which includes a lot of my family.
So when you decided to go to Rome shortly thereafter, you got pushback from your grandmother and your aunt. Why did they push back? And what made you say, fuck it, I'm going to go anyway?
Dude,
In your words, not mine.
That's exactly what I said though. It was that time in my life. I think I was just done. I was so fed up with like, where I was and um just, being 19 and like, having to go through all of these things. I was just done. I wanted to live a normal life. I mean, there was a dream of mine to go away to college, and I never could fulfill that dream because that's senior year of high school is when my brother passed away, and I had to stay home and take care of my family. And so I ended up going to Loyola University in Chicago, which was a 10-minute walking distance from my house in Chicago. And so that's where that was. But I saw, it was like almost this kind of like the universe kind of stepping in again, where there was this, at one of the bulletin boards and like the social hall at the university, it's like study abroad, Rome. And I'm like, oh yes, get me the F out of here. And I just knew, like, my heart was like, yes, do it, apply, do whatever you need to do. And I applied. I like, I did all of the, I got the scholarship to go. I like said, here, I just got in and I need to go. I need to do it for school, do it for dental school. And I remember my grandmother, my mom's mom, and my dad's sister, these were the two matriarchs. They were like, absolutely not. What are you doing? Like, how can you leave your brother? Like, this is not responsible. Your dad just died. What are people going to think? Oh my God, you can't go. And I said, no, I have to go. And so it was just one of those things where I was not going to take no for an answer. I needed, my soul needed to leave. And oof, yeah, when I got to Rome, that 8 or 9 hour flight from Chicago to Rome, and I stepped, and I did not know a lick of Italian. I did not know, I didn't even know anybody in this program, by the way. It was like all brand new peeps. And if you've ever been to Rome in the summer, it's like a hub for young people to go study abroad. I mean, that's what you do. And I obviously didn't know that back then. But you're with so many people from around the world. And that just blew my mind. I'm like, oh my God, this is what studying abroad is like. I can forget everything that I have ever gone through, and I can just totally recreate, like create a new identity here. And I'm like, it just felt like a ton of bricks, just like relieved, off of my shoulders. And just, I felt light. I felt like, oh wow, this darkness is not here. It's not following me. And just like that same kind of, the same routine, the same things like over and over again for that. Literally, it was like a decade of my life and in my most formative years. And I'm getting into, now, this was the summer of my 20th birthday, and being in Rome, boy, did that like forever would change my life to this day. Forever. Italy has such a beautiful place in my heart, simply because of those, those 2 months there.
So you now study, are you practicing cosmetic dentistry? You're married. You've kind of rebuilt your life. You're successful on paper, and but it's not all what it seems.
Yeah. I used my 20s to really prove myself, and it started in Rome. Where like I could create whatever I want because I ended up there, and I could share whatever I choose to share in order to be accepted, in order to not be the weird one. in order to not be the weird girl that has all of this drama in her life. You know, these were the kind of beliefs that I had in my head, or the stories that I had in my head. So, you know, a very pivotal point in my life, December 31st, 2011, where I thought I had done such a good job of convincing to the outside world that I had made it, that I had this very lucrative practice. It was a 7-figure business. I wasn't even 30. I had 10 people working under me. It was all of the ego, the bells and whistles. Every single check mark was, you know, box was checked off for me, proverbially. And I found myself in, you know, I was married. I had this big dream wedding. I fell in love. And I thought that all of those things were going to mask what I was really feeling. And it didn't, because I was literally in a toxic relationship. I was in an abusive marriage. And December 31st was literally the day that I actually admitted to myself, because I was in such denial to my family, such denial to my friends, and more importantly, such denial to myself, because I had been now spiritually broken, mentally just completely off, emotionally distraught. Physically, I was in fear. And so that would then take me through the darkest night of the soul of leaving haphazardly in the middle of the night. This was New Year's Eve, 2011, and take whatever I could. And yeah, and literally say goodbye to that life. And that would
You
also,
mentioned you were staring in this mirror and looking at all your stuff that you'd accumulated and all that. But what preceded that night? Because you also mentioned being in court and having your file was like stapled together because there's so many instances of physical
yeah,
abuse. Did something happen? Was there like
yeah, yeah, it
was there
was,
abuse that happened just before you decided to this is it?
yeah. Oh yeah, that was the cherry on top. It was the last time I would allow him to strike his fist across my face. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that,
Did it ever leave marks, or how did you? Were you wearing a lot of makeup when you went to work? Did people notice
uh,
at work? Did
so
everybody know, but you didn't realize that everybody knew?
I think that if you met us, you'd probably know, just
Mhm.
in, you know, again, I think hurt people, and I'm not gonna, you know, speak on, you know, my ex's behalf, right? Uh, but it's your quintessential codependent relationship. And you know, where it's like the narcissistic and the codependent, perhaps maybe, you know, sociopathic, but I really wanted love, you know, and I was willing to do whatever it took to get that, and to be in a relationship where they weren't going to leave me. Um, but it would definitely break me, because I would then be so afraid to leave, because then the emotional conditioning was, you know, you're worthless, you're broken, you're never going to find anyone. And so I empathize with
Well,
so many.
everyone else had left you. You know, everyone you
Yeah,
cared about had left you at that
it's
point. So
true.
this is one thing you're holding on to.
So you're holding on to it for dear life. And you know, I just I remember even in my therapist's office, just like full hysterics, and saying, but I can't, I like I don't know what else to do. And I remember, you know, him saying, wow, Neeta, just look at where you have come, and you can create a whole new life for yourself. And I would still make excuses, because I was in, you know, the suck. I was fully in it. And that's where I have so much empathy for women who feel like they have to be they're stuck in it. And I think that's where it comes. You have to, there's that rock bottom. And I definitely, that was the rock bottom, because my life was threatened. I mean, you know, he threatened to end my life. Uh, and when that happened, I'm like, okay, this is serious. This is,
Mhm.
you know, this, we're not kidding around anymore. And who am I kidding? And so there I am, you know, in this 5-story home, where I thought everything led to all this success, but I was so broken on the inside and so ashamed of like what people would think. So ashamed that like, you know, she couldn't keep this marriage, or because that was the mentality I grew up in. And God, did it feel so good to leave. But yeah, the first few days, the first few initial weeks, whew, that was dark. It got messy. It got so dark. You know, I don't even talk a lot about the details anymore. But you know, everything that you can ever imagine in a tumultuous divorce, you know, came out from me getting a restraining order, standing before the judge. And I remember the judge like putting her glasses down and being like, what took you so long, honey? And I remember shaking because I was so afraid at that point of public speaking, because I was not the only person in the courtroom. There was a whole line of other women. Some of them had tiny little kids, and I'm like shaking because I'm so afraid of what the world would think. But man, after those words left my mouth, it was like, again, full liberation
Mm.
and full just empowerment and agency, and you know, starting to cultivate you know, that resiliency that I talk about in the book.
So if someone had stopped you going into court that day and said, "Hey, Neeta, you're going to one day become a huge wellness influencer and a leadership coach and entrepreneur. You're going to be giving talks on massive stages and inspiring all these people over the world," would you have believed them?
Oh, no.
And you're going to use your story of being abused. You're going to speak very publicly and openly about it. You're going to write books about it.
You're not going to be shaking anymore like you are right
You won't
now.
be shaking anymore. Would you have believed them? Would you have thought it would be possible in a million years?
No, not in a million years. Not in a million years. And I think forever, whoever is listening, or maybe you have a friend going through something like this, that's where that, you know, the mess can really be the magic. And
Mm.
when we dive into it, when we accept it, it could truly be a lead to your next chapter. And I even remember my divorce lawyer, you know, I was such a hot mess at that time. You know, I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. You know, I went through a lot of betrayal, even in my dental office, and things, like I said, were really dark for a while. And so, and she said, "Neeta, I'm going to talk to you in 5 years, and you are going to be a whole different person." And I still remember those
Mm.
words. And it was
Mm.
crazy because, you know, 5 years later, I'm sending her all of these people because people are coming up to me asking me like, who do I go to for my divorce? And it's just so interesting that like, wow, yeah, it's true. It's true.
You went through this period of saying yes to everything. What happened? Did you read the Surrender Experiment, or how did you get
Oh,
this idea to just say yes? And you ended up in this improv class, and talk about that period.
oh man, it was, ooh, I think I was in such a rock bottom state, like zero confidence, just really in fear. And I totally had
Mhm.
PTSD, that I had to recreate a whole community, that I had left, like whole friend circle. And I think, you know, now you should know that I thrive in community. And for me to walk away from that life and all of those people, and I needed to do something completely different. And I didn't know what it was. But I definitely dove into all kinds of things, and startup, improv, improv and stand-up comedy were like my saving grace. And I remember one of my friends was saying, "Hey, you know, like there's this thing, you should totally go to it." And I said, "Well, where is it at?" And they're like, "Well, it's at Second City." And I'm like, "Second City? That's where people go where they want to like be, you know, it's Saturday Night Live. I can't do
Saturday Night
that.
Live. Yeah.
Like, that's not me." Literally, like, the greats go there, right? And so I'm like, because it was in Chicago, and they're like, "Come on, I think it'd be good for you. I think you just try it out. Just try one." You know, and I remember I was also reading, The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer, and that was, like, on repeat in my life during that time, one of my favorite books still all time. I feel like he's such a godsend, but he, him, of course, the surrender experiment was part of that. Shonda Rhimes' Year of Yes, like all of those books were just, so pivotal during that time. And it was almost just like, okay, fine. If it scares you, then just say yes to it. Just do it. Cause I was just on a mission to find people that were just so different than what suckiness that I was in at that time. And so, I mean, I did the improv. I said yes to a Bible study group, like, like hardcore, you know, um, the non-denominational Christian group. And I'm so thankful for that community for the longest time. But then I became the leader of that small group. And then we started talking about all sorts of things. And then that turned into like starting a book club. Which then that turned into, what we would call today, like a female mastermind, because again, I was looking for community. And, as my human design is a generator, I just needed to generate like these different kinds of opportunities for myself. And that meant saying yes to even, psychedelic experiences. And yes to different kinds of shamans, yes to alternative modes of healing, yes to thought talk therapy, yes to just saying yes. What I was saying no to was male relationships at the time. That part of my life was definitely closed for a while, until I was able to open up, myself to love again. But I think I really needed to do the work for myself. And that meant, looking at, I remember, oh gosh, one of the books that I read, because I definitely went into the whole, narcissistic, codependent relationships. And there was a
Mhm.
ton of books that I was getting my PhD in that whole field at that time, because I was just obsessed with, okay, how was I codependent? What were some of my characteristics? Why did I want that? And so it was like massive self-growth and massive reading. I just became voracious at consuming, to literally get out of this time. And one of the greatest things that I still keep today is, the time at stand-up comedy, because that again legit scared me. Like, I'm like, there's no way, like, how can you create a joke out of a one line? And it just required so much energy and so much thoughtfulness and specificity. And I, of course, me as a recovering perfectionist, I'm like, well, what if they don't laugh at my jokes? And so saying yes to that just like blew my mind away, where then, I entered a pitch competition for, I got into this VC realm of venture capitalists, and they were actually putting on an incubator. And I said I would be an angel investor because they needed women who were also small business owners, to advise some of these females who were talking about their startups. And so I'm like, okay, what's a startup? Like, I didn't even know what that was. And they're kind of like, well, you have a startup. You started your dental practice. And I'm like, yeah. So I sat through one of these, and that's like, again, blew me to another level, because in each of these instances, I was the small fish. I didn't want to be, sat on Saturday Night Live. I didn't care to be a stand-up comedian. I didn't care to be a VC. I was not pitching, to get money for a startup. I was just there, just saying yes to these opportunities. And what it started to happen was I started to say yes to some of the things that I really was passionate about, which was women and girls. And so then I started a nonprofit. And then, that led me to San Francisco and going to the Bay Area and learning from people at the Stanford Business School, because they then ran, the nonprofit management school, because they're teaching these nonprofits how to make money as well. And so that blew myself away, because I'm like, wow, in medicine and in dentistry, no one's talking about this. No one's talking about failing first. We're all talking about how to be perfect and how to be lauded by, the accomplishments that we've had. And it's very egoistic. in that community, where then you go into the startup community and they're like, yeah, I want you to fail. I'm not going to give you money until like I see you have like some sweat equity, some grit. And that then changed my life, because then as I was starting to gain momentum in my nonprofit, and it was very small, it ended up being something very national and local to these universities, but it really got my foot in the door being around really big giants and titans who was actually saving the water crisis and climate change. And then I realized, like, oh wow, okay, this is my little tiny little effort here, but I can actually learn from some of these people who are really doing major things in the world. And once they got to know kind of the resiliency and the emotional grit at the time that I was starting to cultivate and talk about as one of my talking pieces for the nonprofit as well, that's what would start my speaking career. And that's what would really start my advisory into the world of startups and angel investing, and then actually making the hard decision to sell my dental practice and move
Mhm.
to the Bay Area.
I love it. And so internally, what was your mental state like? You've done all this work, right? And you've been exposed to this whole other world. Did that help to cure the anxiety or whatever you felt, or the PTSD that you had been carrying around since you were 16 years old?
Yeah, so I think it transmuted and it transformed into, oh wow, okay, there's something bigger than this. Because every time that I would share my story, whether it was at a high school, and many times, the speaking was at high schools or different, organizations. And this was before it became, these corporate events. Um, Knowing that other people felt solace in hearing my story, it just gave me more, like it like gave more fuel to, all right, this is what we're doing. And it also just activated more of like, okay, I need to do more research on this. Like I need to do more research as to, why we are suffering, in our mental health, why in my dental world, our practice was growing at an exponential rate, 20-30%, and I wasn't even there. My leadership completely changed. So many things completely changed when I started to like just expand. And one of the concepts that I talk about in the book is, really tap into your bounce factor. But it wasn't until that I was making peace with one of the pillars, which is your upbringing. And for me, making peace with my upbringing and really, loving the fact that, hey, all of these things happen for me, was a huge
Mhm.
perspective shift. And allowing myself to, get that support, because that second pillar of building your bounce factor is, how are you invoking, good stress, and how are you surrounding yourself and looking at your current environment right now, and is it actually supporting you? And one of the things that I knew I needed constantly was advisors, mentors, coaches, healers, people that, would take me to that next level in my thinking, in the way that I operated, in the way that I was healing. And I honestly prioritized healing because, for a whole decade before that, I didn't even know. I had no idea. I became such a wellness and health geek, obviously, because, I went through all those losses. And I also think that I became really obsessed with, um, you know, with with alternative modes of healing. And that's where it literally took me around the world.
And how are you defining success these days? You've achieved so much, and you have,
Oh,
again, on paper, you have the perfect family and all of that. So, how are you measuring that now?
mm. So now I feel like it's basically the relationships that I've been able to
Hmm.
cultivate. And I think it's one of the reasons why I started, a podcast. I never thought I was going to start one. And, a couple years ago, I was in just like, the thickness of the pandemic and pregnant and all the things. And because I had started one a long time ago and I got so burnt out by it. And I remember that my, husband was like, this is what you do. You love having conversations with people. And we would just have them. And because we're big community builders, so we'd be like, come over, and we've said it to you too, come over when you're in LA or whatever, because that's just how we are. We've been able to amass community throughout the world, and it starts with like relationships and friendships in that way. And I think one of the ways to really go deep with somebody is like that one-on-one conversation, which is what we've been able to do in the 90 minutes. But I think that's kind of our level of success. I was so thankful this year that we were able to take 16 of our friends to Turkey for, a big milestone birthday that I had. And I'm like, wow, we are able to do this. And it just shows that community is just it has been literally the through line from, me being 12, 13, 14 years old to even now. And yeah, and I'm so just unapologetic in cultivating those relationships and friendships on a deeper level.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Final question for you. Do you miss anything about being a dentist?
Oh gosh, no. It's funny when people ask me that, I'm like, no, I don't. Oh gosh, no. Yeah,
That's so
no.
interesting.
Yeah.
I think dentistry is like one of the most suicidal occupations or something, right?
You know what I loved about it? I'll tell you what I loved about it. I love the human aspect. I love the intimacy because literally, someone's like,
Doesn't get more intimate. Well, maybe a
just like right
proctologist,
here.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
you're close. You're very close. And so I loved the intimacy. I loved that sort of connection, and I did cosmetics, and so I think that it really shaped their, the way that they saw themselves and their external confidence, and
Yeah.
if I was able to play a role in that. But really going deeper, what I really loved was the transformation, right? And so I didn't really care to do the millimeters of I loved the artwork around it. But I loved seeing their face when they would see what they looked in the mirror after something was repaired, or you could see their full smile again, or you could see the facial aesthetics being done. And that was cool. And I loved building a team and
Mhm.
empowering the team and doing team things for the community. Again, community builder, right? And I loved getting everybody involved. And it was like such a small town that we were doing this in. It was like the suburbs of Chicago, but that was what I loved. And I still do that. It's just a different
I was
way.
going to say, you're doing it. You're still doing it.
It's a different
I
way.
say that the
Yeah.
best makeup is your smile, and you're still doing that. You're taking people's messy, emotional stuff and life stuff, and you're turning it into something that's actually beautiful, and or helping them to do that. And so just want to acknowledge you for, gosh, man, you've gone through so much, and you're still here, and you're still shining even brighter than ever. And it's an honor to know you and to call you a friend. And I look forward to connecting with you all in person again. Next time I come to your city, we'll definitely connect, and
We'll definitely
I'll
have
come on
that
to your
dinner.
podcast.
Yes,
Yeah,
we'll
we'll
do
have
it.
that dinner.
We'll do it. We'll get you on everyone's podcast when you come out here.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again for being so open and generous in your share, and look forward to sharing this with my audience.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to say, like, you're an incredible interviewer, love. Like a lot of the questions. Yeah. So thank you.
If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.